All right. Welcome back, guys. James and I here are going to go through cards 13 through 25 of the NealZ fan set and break down the thought process behind the design a little bit and just review them a little bit more thoroughly than we've had time to discuss. The first video kind of went well and I think covered a lot of the grounds we were looking for. And I hope to cover the same kind of territory with this one. So without further ado, we'll just kind of get right into this one. Share my screen here. All right, there we go. And right out of the gate, we're just going to start with the red style mastery. Power on this one. You cannot win by most powerful personality victory. You gain twice the amount of anger from your red style cards. When you reach 5 anger, you may advance or lower a personality level. If you have gained anger this combat, while your anger is not 0 or 1, your red style attacks deal +1 life card of damage. There's a lot going on here. This on paper sounds like a super powerful mastery. But one of the big things that I feel like, and James too feels like is missing in this game is so much of the show, is the characters going through different stages of their transformations to the point it's almost a fault even that Goku just always has some new transformation every time shit goes south. Yeah. But there's a ton of games in Score Z where you'll just sit on level 1 forever or maybe get to level 2 by accident, and it doesn't really. So much of the game is super thematic, and that's the one aspect that it doesn't quite capture well, or at least in a lot of games. So building that into the already kind of angry style fit pretty naturally, and I think this is a great way to kind of emphasize an under-realized aspect of the show in the card game itself.
Yeah, and then also too, like we haven't had a red mastery that positively affected your own anger since the Trunks Saga mastery. Like none of the, we have the Cell Saga, which is just physical attack damage. The World Games about energy attacks, and then the Buu Saga mastery was about focused attacks. And so we haven't had a red mastery that really focused around anger since Trunks Saga, and that felt kind of weird. So want to try to make a mastery that harkened back a little bit more to what red was originally about.
Absolutely. And the ability to go up and down, up or down, I guess, when you level, also adds a lot of utility to the creativity behind building different stacks. There's a lot of times where it didn't really matter what a lot of the individual stages were, especially if your goal was just to like level to 4 or something. There are some decks that wanted to do that and just beat from the highest level, but this adds a lot of versatility to moving up and down, going back to a level 2 to use that power again, and things like that. This is one of the masteries I personally am the most excited to play. I think it's really going to open an avenue of the game that is definitely underexplored, at least from the score side of things.
Yeah, it's definitely, you don't see a lot of personality changing in Score Z, and there's very few ways outside of just getting Anger to do that, and then outside of like Supreme Kai's Key Push, like there's really not a way to actually lower yourself personality level either. So this opens up a lot of neat things you could try to do.
Yeah. The Panini version of the game, Pansy and Fanzy even to an extent, have much more realized the sort of level hopping aspect of the game, and that's represented a lot in a ton of cards in that game. There are a ton of cards that lower your opponent a level. There are a ton of cards that lower you a level to do a thing. A ton of cards that bounce you up 2 to go down 2. There's a couple things like that in Score. Like Gohan's what is that, power?
Yeah, Gohan's immense
power. Whatever. Yeah, immense power. Stuff like that, or intensity drill, apocalyptic battle, like kind of things like that. But none of it is like an integral part of the way you built your deck, and I think that's represented really well here.
Yeah, definitely.
Carried on into that itself brings us into our next card. Red Critical Blow. a physical combat card. It's a physical attack doing +4 stages of damage. Raises your anger 1 level. If successful, you may discard the top card of your life deck. If you do, draw a card. This is good, obviously, for this mastery, in that it naturally raises your anger 2, which is just a fantastic start out of the get-go. Plus the buff from the end if you're not at 0 or 1 anger. Great, too. But also works well with some of the other red masteries where your discard pile itself matters a little bit more, too. And giving red a little bit more advantage, hand advantage, keeps it up with some of the other larger hand size colors. There are a couple of red draw cards, a handful of them for sure. But I personally, especially in red decks I've played, I would have always liked like another possible card. But of course, with the drawback of, it does cost an additional card out of your deck. It's using that effect is essentially burning 2 from the deck. So there is a drawback to it, but comboed with being able to level through multiple stages in a combat with more anger gain means that the red action economy will improve pretty dramatically. And I think that'll be really interesting to see.
Oh, yeah. I'm always a big fan of like looting effects or ways to be able to get yourself card advantage at some kind of cost. In this case, cost kind of twofold. One, you have to hit with the attack, and then 2, you have to also have to discard top card of your deck. You have to draw a card, kind of keep your action going. Also, I love this art from Dragon Ball. It's an iconic shot of Goku slamming Piccolo, and yeah, this feels like a red card. I really appreciate that.
And another feels like a red card. This one saw a little bit of debate before we really found the spot where it felt particularly red, and that's Red Masenko. This one's an energy attack. It does 6 life cards of damage, raises your anger 1, naturally 2 with the mastery. If your anger level is 3 or higher, you gain 2 power stages, and damage from this attack is removed from the game instead of discarded. We toyed with this ability quite a bit. In fact, this was one of James's first pet project cards. Went back to the drawing board quite a few times with some ideas on this one, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Initially, what drew me to this first was actually was the art. Because I was like, man, we don't see a lot of Gohan actually throwing energy attacks in the cards. And I was like, and this the color this one's like this should be a red card. And I had thought about this one before the red mastery had really become solidified. So I was kind of going blind as to what kind of effect this might have. And the initial iteration was this giant red attack that, if successful, it would give you a negative effect, and if stopped, to give you a worse negative effect. It was very reminiscent of there's a Namekian energy attack that does something similar, and didn't feel very red. But then once the mastery had kind of been sorted out a little bit, it became a lot easier to go back to this. Like, okay, how do I adjust this to make it feel like more red card? And this is what we came up with.
Absolutely. And I'm really happy with where Red Masenko ended up. I think this is a great red card. I think anything that's going to gain 2 anger in that mastery especially is going to be awesome. And then if your anger is 3 or higher, that's going to be super easy to do, especially with that mastery. Although any of the red pool will pretty much, it'll be fairly easy to make that a thing. Getting 2 power stages off of this means that, it essentially just costs you nothing. But then damage removed and instead of discarded really helps a lot with some of those red decks that, like if we think of like red Pui or stuff like that, that's already pushing to remove from the game. This is going to be a staple card in that for sure.
Oh, yeah.
The next color we've got is the opposite end of the spectrum here with blue. This is the blue style mastery. Once per combat, when you make a successful attack with a blue style card, stop the next physical or energy attack your opponent performs. This effect can stop focused attacks While your opponent's anger is 0 or 1, your attacks deal +2 stages and +2 life cards of damage. James, you want to run with this one?
Yeah. So kind of like with the red mastery, I wanted to go blue mastery, and the blue style is known as the calming style, and so I wanted to give it some kind of benefit of keeping your opponent's anger low. But then at the same time, I didn't want to stick it in a purely defensive capacity. Because blue's another style that's done a lot of different things throughout the cycle of Score Z. We have the Trunk Saga Mastery, which is literally just stop anger. And have the Cell Saga Mastery, it's also stopped anger. It also lets you get an extra defense by discarding a card from your hand. Then World Games was a complete 180. It's your energy attacks get buffed and raise your anger. And then the Blue Saga Mastery, which augmented your physical attacks and lets you prevent a lot of damage. So it's kind of all over the place. And I wanted to come up with something that, blue, I've never really seen blue as this big offensive powerhouse of a style, but something that focuses more on control and, being able to sort of mix your offense and defense. And I think this does that pretty well by rewarding you for having some kind of offense instead of just being like your more traditional like blue Dragon Ball deck, something like that, which just turtle all the time. This mastery encourages you to be able to have a decent amount of offense and also keep your opponent's anger low so that your attacks can do more damage.
Absolutely. Balancing that control, I think, is a really interesting part of this mastery. There are a lot of blue decks that just get kind of dirtily because that sort of is the way all the masteries work. You're either Majid blue, or you just don't die for the rest of the game, or you're the exact opposite where you just World Games blue and you're just hoping for energy attacks to land all game. There's not really like a home, but so much of the blue card pool is about controlling your opponent's anger, and none of it really like quite lined up into where like the masteries just didn't quite line up with the color. And I think this one really focuses on rewarding you, like James said, for playing blue the way blue wants to be played, while still letting you keep up with the rest of the colors. One of the things that I think blue has a drawback to blue. Blue has never been fantastic, but it's being the control color. Is it the damage output has never been incredibly high. So you're kind of controlling into nowhere. There's nothing that you're controlling to you, and that's why blue ball decks and stuff end up working, because you're just sort of hanging out for a while, and this alleviates that a little bit. It wants you to push that control aspect that blue is designed to do, but also keeps you in the game a little bit more and keeps it a little bit more of an actual fight. And the blue card pool for this mastery, and for the the NealZ, fan set, definitely pushes that as well. With this first card here, for example, blue overpowering aura. It's power endurance 3. Great off the bat there. Stop a physical attack, lower your opponent's anger 2. If your opponent's anger is 0 or 1, raise your main personality to its highest power stage and prevent 2 life cards of damage from your opponent's attacks for the remainder of combat. Obviously, all of this is great. Blue in general, stop a physical attack, lower your opponent's anger 2 is a pretty blue block anyway. Endurance 3 fits that great. And then if your opponent's anger is 0 or 1, being able to power back up to full prevents 2 additional life cards from your opponent's attacks for the rest of the game, helps push that blue defensive ideal, but powering up to full also helps you with being able to crack back on offense, and with by still having enough stages to do something in return.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So there's a lot of like blue stops in general. Just going through the Score Z library, they don't. Most blue stops don't do a lot. They'll lower your opponent's anger. They might raise your anger. Physical stops in particular, and there's not a lot else going on. You have a couple things. You have like blue arm blast, which is energy or physical stop, but for the most part, blue stops don't do a hell of a lot. So it was kind of fun to come up with a blue stop that actually did things for you.
Yeah, I think this definitely becomes an incredibly important blue stop in future deck building. I don't think there's a time when you wouldn't run this.
Oh yeah.
Even if you were playing any of the other masteries, this is just a great block.
Yeah.
And the next one, I think, is another card that's pretty important. Blue Crushing Blow. Physical attack, focused physical attack, in fact, doing +3 stages of damage, lowers your opponent anger 1. If your opponent's anger is at 0, damage from this attack cannot be prevented. If successful and you're dealt at least 1 life card of damage, your opponent cannot gain anger or power stages until the end of this turn. And then most importantly, this card is unaffected by your opponent's Goku Sensei. This, I think, is huge. I would not play blue without 3 of this myself going forward. Blue being the anger control deck, being able to be turned off completely by a single sensei sucks. And this gets you back in the game. Your opponent not being able to gain stages or anger for the rest of the turn despite their sensei. The damage output itself is nice. Focus physical is good. Being focused means that it's a little more likely to deal that anger as well. Paired with the mastery from this set, this attack's going to do even more damage if you can get them to 0, and it can't be prevented. I just think this is an incredibly staple blue card.
Yeah, this card, it's got a lot going on, but and part of that too is to help kind of maintain the balance of the card, just because it can potentially just do a whole hell of a lot all at once. So unlike the stop, this one only lowers your opponent's anger 1. So getting them to 0, because 0 is takes a little bit more effort if you want to get the damage can't be prevented aspect.
Absolutely.
And then the successful part is the big part, which also kind of plays into wanting to get your opponent's anger to 0, because you have to do at least 1 life card of damage. So you want to be able to get them anger 0, that way they can't prevent damage, so you're guaranteed to get that part through. And it gives your opponents a little bit of counterplay as well, just so this isn't completely busted beyond belief. But it is very strong, and definitely would be a blue staple in any deck that would use this new mastery going forward. Even for any kind of blue offense, this does a lot for you.
Yeah. Even if you didn't build a blue deck that was focused around anger control, as an idea at all. I mean, you can build a blue deck that doesn't really do that. Even if that was the case, I think this would be a card that I would see making its way into a lot of decks. I don't think it's broken by any means, and in fact, I think it's not even one of the best cards in this whole fan set. But I do think it's an incredibly good card for blue. It really focuses. It really hones in on like the main point of blue and just kind of captures it all in one card. And of course, it has cooler on it, so yeah, that's pretty tight.
Yeah,
that's another criminally underrepresented film in the CCG itself. And having a little more of that art. This is such an iconic moment. We got like Cooler's surprise attack or whatever, which is an iconic scene from the movie, but this is another scene that's just the way Cooler just dominated Goku for the early part of that fight was something that definitely should have been represented on more cards.
Oh yeah.
And that's the last of our styled cards within the fan set. We've got 7 more cards here, 2 allies and 5 freestyle cards. So we'll kind of dig right into that. First one we've got is Super Saiyan Retaliation.
Give me just a second. I'll be right back.
Sure. This one here stops a physical or energy attack. The next attack you perform this combat gains any secondary and/or, if successful, effects of the attack you stopped with this card. If used by a personality with Saiyan heritage, this stays on the table to be used 1 more time this combat, removed from the game after use. This, as you can imagine, is an incredibly powerful block. Being able to stop a physical or energy is huge. Therefore, but that being said, doesn't stop focused attacks. On the next attack that you perform this combat, it gains any of the bonuses from the attack you stopped. There are some times where that won't do a lot. There are some times where that would be a huge boon to this card. Being able to, welcome back, being able to use that a second time as well also means it gives you a little bit more versatility with the additional, if successful, effect from another attack. It means you can waste kind of one of those on a little bit more basic attack and the second one on a more involved secondary effect. And then, of course, remove from the game after use, because it'd have to be.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say about this one? I know this one was one of your babies.
Yeah. Thing about freestyle stuff and specifically like not named freestyle cards. Probably one of the best defenses we have right now is Ultimate Defense, which is a really good card. But it's the only one that kind of functions the way it does. And I was like, okay, could we have something else that could compete with that for a freestyle defense slot? And then kind of came up with this one. It is pretty strong, but it's not strong for everyone. There are a lot of decks that won't be able to take advantage of the second part of this card as well as others.
Absolutely.
Like a Saiyan style deck probably takes advantage of the second part of this card better than, say, a blue or a red deck would, or even like a Namekian deck. But it's still so I wouldn't see this card being put in like every deck, but it definitely is it's a very strong effect, and it definitely finds a home in a lot of places.
Yeah, I think it's a great card. Obviously, there are situations when it doesn't pan out to be the full effect. But even if you drop the sort of second use of the card, being able to stop a single physical or energy and then gain the effects from that attack is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Granted, you'd have to have an attack of your own to follow up with.
Oh yeah.
But it's just one of those cards where it facilitates and encourages proper turn sequencing and understanding, when to use an effect like this. I think it's a very skillful card. I mean, you could play it very unskillfully and just block any attack and then just use whatever it did. But using it to really maximize the effect of it is going to be, it'll be one of those cards that's divides the good players from the casuals, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we've got Straining Key Build-Up move. This card got a lot of discussion. Duly so. It, in its initial iteration, did create a potential problem. But it's been addressed a little bit, and I think this tones it down to a point where it feels much safer, and but still is a really interesting effect. Endurance 3 out of the gate is cool on a freestyle card in general, but your opponent's floating effects that might prevent you from gaining power stages end. Your main personality gains 5 power stages. For the remainder of combat, you may discard any number of cards from the top of your deck before performing an attack. Gain 1 stage for each card discarded this way, to a maximum of your highest power stage, of course. At the end of combat, lower your MP to its lowest power stage and discard all of your allies in play. There's a lot to take in here. But
yeah.
There's a lot of built-in chains on the restraints of this card. Being able to cut off any your opponent can't gain stages for the turn is naturally just a good effect, and then being able to immediately gain stages from that is good too. For the rest of the turn, anytime you would form an attack, you can discard cards from your attack to gain stages. That helps keep you in the game against physical stage lock decks, things like that. You can still only go to your maximum stage. One of the ideas that was brought up with the first kind of iteration of this card is that you could just mill, 47, 43 cards and then have just Dragon Balls left in the deck and ball out pretty easily, which, is a valid concern. And I think this, that caps that off. Additionally, one of the concerns people had with this is that, oh, it just puts you at 0 at the end of your turn. Well, that's great. You power yourself up to full, set up, a ton of attacks, end your turn with a bunch of allies on the board, and then that's still broken. So this is, being able to the fact you have to lose all of your allies in play after this effect means that you can't loop into any of that kind of tomfoolery, and it really sets a steep cost on the decks that can utilize this. There are a lot of decks that don't care about allies in their deck, and this will see a safer home in that build for sure. But as all straining cards, its effect, its positive effects come with a pretty serious drawback.
Yeah, I really wanted to have a straining type of move for this set because I hadn't seen one of those in a little while, and this is also an effect that's not presently in the game, being able to circumvent an effect that prevents you from gaining power stages like that. It was, and then just a matter of getting the wording right and everything so that it doesn't, potentially get abused on the back like Derek's talking about. Also, the art's pretty fitting with Trunks going into his super buff form. That turns out has pretty big drawbacks.
Yeah, I'm really happy with the way this card turned out. This is one that the community discussed at length for a couple of days, and I'm really happy with the changes that were made and where it's ended up. I think it's a much less abusable card now. It has the big setback that we kind of envisioned in our head when we were building it, but without missing words that would cause it to be abusable in unintended ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Another one here. Got the double elbow slam. Another film that's just kind of unrepresented, not represented well enough in the game. There are a couple of Garlic Jr. things, but not enough, especially of the fight with Garlic Jr. himself. But double elbow slam, endurance 2, physical attack doing +3 stages of damage. If the attack is redirected to an ally, damage from this attack is dealt to all of your opponent's personalities in play. Pretty self-explanatory. Take this damage yourself, don't put it on an ally or they're all taking it. I think that's just a really cool way to kind of punish a lot of these go wide ally decks that try to build up this board, take some damage themselves, mitigate some to the other ones, and then just instead of playing with 10 stages like they're playing with 65.
Yeah.
And this is a way to tell them like evens the playing field. And there's not a lot of times I think where this will be I don't think this will be mained in a ton of decks, to be honest. I could see this being a fairly common side deck card or sensei deck card.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are a lot of times where this would be. This is the kind of attack that I would Hercule's amazing technique to pull this from the deck. If I found that there was just a board full of allies, I'm like, well, gotta get the attack through, or everyone's taking it. Deal with it.
Yeah, especially take advantage of the fact that most ally decks, they want their MP, they try to get their MP to 0 as quickly as possible, and then suddenly they're faced with, well, I can eat a humongous hit to my life deck or to my allies, lose several power stages.
Yeah.
It's a good trade-off.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting card. I do think it's cool because physical attack doing +3 out of the gate isn't an incredible, just it's not +8 or something. It's a tame damage output by default, but you pair that with additional things to really beef this up. If you get yourself out with like a devastation drill or something like that, and really just start pushing your opponent with this, you could definitely build this into a deck that was focused around this card being utilized. But I don't think it's one that will find its way just like slotted into every deck that you build.
Right.
And that was the goal. It's, we talked about it in the first video that the idea with these was that you would open them out of a pack and be like, well, this one works for me, this one doesn't, I could trade that one. Just like it would be if you bought regular cards. And I think this does that. There are some people who will have a deck for this and it will just scream like, I need to run this. There are other people who will just be like, I don't even care, and they'll just never look at it again. Yeah. And I think that's a cool balance especially for like a fan-made card to have.
Absolutely.
The big Getty Star. An art that we have seen already in the game, in an incredibly poorly named card that already exists within the Cosmic Anthology set and does nothing good. This one here is a non-combat. It's power. When this card enters play, attach it to your main personality. Once per combat, as an action, you may discard the top card of your life deck to search your life deck for a Metacooler clone, put it into play at 3 stages above 0. While this card is attached, your drills do not leave play when you advance a personality level. There's a lot of things here that just seem kind of generic and not incredibly relevant, but once you start thinking a little bit bigger picture with what it all kind of pairs into, this is a card that was obviously built for a very specific deck and a very specific MP to just try to give it a little bit more literal hands-on support. And this is for mostly designed for a blue Majin Buu style Metacooler deck. Now, granted, you could play it in any given Metacooler blue deck, but I think blue Majin Buu makes the most sense, or at least in my head, and that's the way I have Metacooler built in my head, and that's where this card came from. But the Metacooler clone we'll get into in a second as we go a little further into this, and it'll play a little bit more into what the Metacooler deck wants to do. But so much about the blue Metacooler deck is keeping drills in play that give yourself attack buffs, and if they are in play, then different things can happen. Having this card where if you do level, you don't lose your drills, just makes it you're just a little bit more sticky and lets you see a little bit more of the stages through the Metacooler stack instead of just camping one all game. As an action, discard the top card of your life deck. Search your deck for Metacooler is great. It does give you an opportunity to get a fresh card onto the top of your discard pile. The Metacooler MP does want the top card of your discard pile to be blue, and this gives you at least another opportunity to make that happen. And then just as soon as it enters play, it attaches your main personality, circumvents a little bit of the slow pace that non-combat cards can have. The Metacooler clone will make the sort of second part of this effect make a little bit more sense. And we'll get into that one in just a second. But we've got one last card here, one last freestyle card. This one's designed for another specific support. This one is Bountiful Harvest. It's a combat card. Raise your anger 1 level. Free just 1 anger. Nice. Worst case scenario. If you do not have Energetic Fruit in play, you can search your life deck or discard pile for 1 and play. If there is already an Energetic Fruit attached to your main personality, you may search for the Crusher Core instead, if it is not already in play. Remove from the game after use. The Crusher Core is, again, a card we'll get to in just a second, but this card is, along with the Crusher Core, designed to try, at least, to make Turles playable, at least worth having in a card sleeve. Currently, he is not. In fact, he's even nerfed by Score's rules themselves for no reason. But being able to just play this and get an Energetic Fruit and immediately attach it to your MP is nice. That immediately powers your MP up to full. That if you have a Tree of Might in play, it means you only need 4 anger to advance a level. It increases your power-up rating, I believe, as well. And all of that combined makes Turles a little bit more hardy out the gate.
It's also
Plus
pretty
the free
flavorful
anger
with
is nice
Turles as well. Like his whole thing was getting the fruit, and this is very flavorful with that.
Yeah. The next card is the Metacooler clone. Probably jump back a little bit to refer to the Getty Star here, but the clone, with the Getty Star, once per turn, mill a card, get one of these out of your deck. As you can see here, if your main personality is Metacooler, you can include up to 6 copies of this in your deck. As a power, it stops a physical attack. You may discard this card from play to shuffle 2 drills in your discard pile back into your life deck. Now, this starts to make kind of the idea of that make a little bit more sense. You have these Metacoolers that you can just build this wall of to stop your opponent's physical attacks. And then, especially with like blue style mastery, Majin Buu blue style anyway. When you take an energy attack, you can just lose cards from discard to banish to keep that damage low as well. And that just makes Metacooler an incredibly dense opponent. Plus the ability to shuffle 2 cards back into your life deck. Drill specifically is huge for as much as the Metacooler MP wants to do with keeping its blue drills in play. If you do lose those, you can sacrifice the ability to have this wall of physical blocks to get some of those drills back and try to rebuild that system as well. I personally think this card, combined with the Gutty Star, will absolutely help Metacooler see a little bit more play, and will it really addresses the things Metacooler wants to do and helps. The problem with Metacooler is a lot of the things Metacooler wants to do are really easy to disrupt. Keeping a board full of drills is hard to do. Keeping your opponent's ability to like move cards out of your discard pile is also really strong, is really prevalent in a lot of colors, and that makes keeping the top card of your discard pile blue difficult. So all of this just really kind of helps keep that that train on track, if you will.
Oh yeah.
I'm curious to see if we have a couple of guys who do play blue Metacooler currently, and I'm curious to see if they would end up with, if they really run 6 of this Metacooler clone, or if there's a sweet spot of like 3 or 4 of them or whatever. I'm curious to see what will come of that.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see how the Getty Star and then the Metacooler clone would affect how Metacooler decks perform.
Yeah,
sure.
It's what I'm really excited to see.
Yeah.
And lastly, the Crusher Core themselves. This is a huge buff for Turles. If your MP is Turles, this card counts as 5 allies for combat effects, or for card effects. It's got a constant combat power when entering combat. If the Tree of Might is not in play, search your deck for one and put it into play. If Turles is your MP, you may use this power regardless of his power level. There's obviously just a ton of benefit to this, plus a ton of flavor. If your MP is Turles, card counting as 5 allies for card effects is great. His level 1 power itself is, it's a physical attack that does +1 stage for every personality in play. So right out of the gate, if you play blue, if you play Turles with, what is that? Is that South Kai Sensei that gets the ally? So South Kai Sensei, you go first or whatever. Non-combat step, play Crusher Core. You enter combat. This card's in play. That immediately gets you tree, which makes your attacks do more. When entering combat, then your tree triggers. You can get caught off guard drill. You can get, you can get devastation drill. You could do whatever you wanted, and have a really
not caught off guard. They're villains.
Oh yeah, sorry. But yeah, you could have a really big opening turn with Turles, which I think helps. Again, for as bad of an MP as he is, having a big turn 1 will really let him get far enough ahead, I think, in the game to keep him relevant throughout the game. Plus, being able to play a Tree of Might at a speed that is not skip combat is a really unique effect, but is also really, really beneficial. But it balances itself out a little bit in that Tree of Might, does affect both players. And it's not just an immediate buff for yourself. It can hurt you pretty dramatically too, in that your opponent, say you're playing against a hero, your opponent can get their own caught off guard drill and immediately have something to name that you can't use and things like that. So that opens some balance there. But with Crusher Core as your initial play, with Turles, you've got a physical attack for +7 as your opening turn 1 physical, which is a huge opening physical attack.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really, I think that helps a really underpowered MP become relevant. And then when you pair that with the fruit from a couple of cards ago, where this grabs the energetic fruit from your deck, it makes sense. You have the tree out, the tree makes fruits, keeps the flavor on point. But there are times where you already have a fruit attached and it doesn't make sense. So you can use this to get the Crusher Core back again, which helps you keep that effect going for your Turles stack. I'm really excited to try a red Turles deck where you just get to level 3 as quick as you can and start using that constant combat power that he has, where your attacks can't be prevented or reduced. No endurance against the big attacks is a pretty exciting thing to try to build into, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, and also being able to, I think it's just level 2 lets you sacrifice an ally.
Yep.
And then as level 3, I think the power itself gets stronger the more allies that are removed from game.
Yes, sir.
And Crusher Core helps with that dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can remove use this to get your tree out and then get it removed from the game, that just makes his level 3 power dramatically better. And Turles is my favorite character, and I play him in every game that I can. I mained him in the Panini game. I play him in the Dragon Ball Super game. I play him in the Bandai Dragon Ball Z CCG. Like, every chance I get, I want to play Turles. And luckily, Turles is maybe unluckily, Turles is terrible in this game. So I got the opportunity to splash a couple cards into this set to really help something I'm personally very attached to. So these 2 cards were cards that I have a lot of pride in. I'm really, really happy with how they ended up. And I think they'll open up Turles to being at least an option people could explore instead of just leaving him in the back of the binder with Caterpie or whatever you want to don't run.
Yeah, for sure.
Cosmic Anthology had a few MPs in it, and really the only thing that has anything interesting that it actually does is the Zarbon. And I think getting to capitalize on that a little bit more is cool. Sorry, ones that are still legal. We can't have our Westkais anymore, but yeah. That's the last of the cards in the NealZ New Dimensions fan set. I'm personally really, really happy with how all of them turned out, especially after having discussed them with some members of the community. I think they've a lot of the issues that people did have out of the gate were addressed and resolved. I know, obviously, there are some folks who still have a little bit of cold feet about the idea of fan cards at all, and I get that. It's understandable. We're not professional devs or anything at the end of the day, and so I get the idea of tarnishing the purity of the real card game, but I think it's at least been expressed by many in this even the small community that we play within the league itself, that freshening the card pool a little bit would be interesting. To the point where we've even discussed adding like select GT cards into the pool. And I just think that is the GT card game is so obviously a different game. You can play expanded and it works, but it's such a different experience. And I think that this a nice little 25 card pool helps expand the game. It freshens up the play environment. It introduces some new mechanics. Not new mechanics per se. It streamlines some unfocused mechanics that already existed, and just kind of helps with. There are a lot of cards in the card pool that already exist that don't have any reason to be played, and the goal was to try to make some of those see a little bit more play. And I think this does a lot of that.
Yeah, and also the idea too of being able to see or experiment with what the game might have looked like going forward, not going in GT, but instead exploring some stuff that wasn't already explored within the Score game, and then going beyond that, what the game might have looked like going into like the new movies and maybe into Dragon Ball Super, what the game, how it would have evolved, what it might look like. And so it's a great experiment to go and, experiment with that and see, okay, how would this game have evolved to incorporate these new things? And
yeah,
It's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of untapped potential, I think, still in the card game itself that
Absolutely.
to explore.
And one disclaimer I'd like to add to the idea of this fan expansion. At the end of the day, we're all busy 30-plus-year-old adults now, for the most part. No one has time to digest another 100-card set. And the idea isn't to put out another 25 cards every 3 days, or even more than once a year or ever. Maybe this is the only thing that ever gets made, and we sprinkle, one card randomly here or there. We've talked a little bit about letting winners of like yearly tournaments kind of come up with a card idea to introduce into the card pool the following year and expand the card pool like one card a year after this. And I think that's a really interesting concept and something I think there's a lot of room to discuss and see what happens with. But I think this 25 card pool is small enough but interesting enough to really shake things up without invalidating just playing your real cards. I don't think there's any deck here in any of the cards that have been made that would immediately devalidate playing a non-NealZ New Dimensions deck. I think these just amplify an already fantastic card pool and just increase the enjoyment of the format in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we won't just sit here in Midwest goodbye much longer here. James, thanks for hanging out 2 times now and going through these with me. Thanks for stepping in and helping with designing these. When Neal first approached me about the idea, I was positive it was just going to be eventually someone would give me some card idea and I'd slap it into the program and make it happen. But it was really fun to go through and actually kind of dev all these out and break down the ins and outs of it. I'm excited for you guys, the community, anyone watching, anyone who's made it to the end of 2 hours of this review across 2 videos. I'm excited for your input. I hope that seeing something like this helps with some of the trepidation that I know some of you do have about this kind of thing happening at all. I hope that seeing the discussion, seeing that there is a lot of thought that went into each and every one of these makes you a little more comfortable, a little more confident in the balance it'll leave in the game. And of course, the beauty of fan cards is that if something doesn't work or is broken, all it takes is to just cut it or change it, and it takes a minute. It's not like these hit the printing press and they're just in the game forever. There's anything can be done to this. If card NZ13 is just busted, we either change it or cut it entirely. It's easy to do, and I think that'll be a really interesting thing to see if people do pick up some of these to try out for themselves. What will be good if anything does come out of the woodwork as busted that just gets missed, as is the natural process of designing cards within a card game. Even in professionally made games, you find that a set will come out and something will be broken in a way that the devs were like, oh man, I had completely missed that. I had zero thought in my mind that you could do that, and someone breaks it and it takes an errata or a ban or something to fix it. And that happens in Magic, the biggest card game in the world. That still happens every single set, so it's
it happened with Score Z. I mean, you look at the errata for even just Score Z, and it's pages and pages long because they had to go back and either rewrite or clarify a million different cards because
or the entire first set.
So
I just think it'll be really interesting to see if you guys do dig into building with some of this stuff, what you'll come up with, what ideas you'll have, and I'm curious how the NealZ masteries and decks themselves will compete against other decks. I know I'm personally going to be building red Turles out of the gate. I'm really excited about that. I've already got my Turles cards pulled. I've got my fruits and trees ready to go. So I'm curious what'll happen there. I'm curious what the Alex, Gavin, or you guys. I'm excited what you'll have with Evan, too. I'm excited what you'll have with Metacoolers. I'm just excited to see what happens. I hope that people do latch on and give it a shot. Worst case scenario, they don't, and it was just a fun experiment. But
yeah,
I'm very hopeful for
and I had a blast working on these, and I really hope, like Magical Christmas Land, pie in the sky kind of thing. I hope that people kind of embrace this, and eventually, people come open to, or people start asking, wins in Z2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if that happens, not only will I be dumbfounded and incredibly excited, I'll also be incredibly open to the idea of expanding it. James and I have 40 more cards we've just slapped on the idea on paper. So the idea narrowing this to 25 cards was already hard. There's so many more things I would love to see the game do, especially if we're going to branch into Super itself. Even thematically, the stuff that happens in Super it just introduces new mechanics entirely. So really curious to see what if the future holds that at all, or if NealZ cards hit the table in any game ever. Who knows?
Yeah.
End of the day, thanks so much for hanging out. I hope you guys give it a shot, and hope you watched all the way through the video. That'd be impressive by itself.
Yeah.
Adios.
All right, see you guys.